Welcome to MAP, the bi-weekly market access podcast hosted by me, Dr. Stefan Walzer. I am the innovator of Market Access 4.0 and a health economist by training and working in the fields of market access, reimbursement, pricing, and health economics since 2004. Discover Market Access 4.0 and unveil the future with our innovative solutions. Max Insights, our fast and easy AI-based reimbursement planning platform. Dobo, our new revolutionizing way of creating reimbursement dossiers across the globe with the first and only dossier writing AI bot. Cubo, our new AI-based objection handling platform. And Waffle, train with Waffle's virtual reality genius in an immersive environment and with an AI-based counterpart. We are Market Access 4.0. So check out our website, marketaccess4-0.com. And now let's dive into the current discussions, processes, and trends in market access across the globe. So welcome to another episode of MAP, the Market Access podcast. Today I have the pleasure to have, again, a great guest. Today with me is Thomas Hammerschmidt. He is an expert in the German market. But before I would maybe raise too many of different kind of question marks, what you do and what you have done as well in the past, Thomas, feel free to quickly introduce yourself before we jump into some further topics around the AMNOG pathway.
Yeah, thank you, Stefan. It's nice to be here again. I think we talked a few years ago on 10 years of AMNOG and the end of paradise. Yeah, I'm an economist and I worked several years in the pharmaceutical industry in the market access field until AMNOG was introduced. And since 11 years, I'm now a professor for pharma management at the Technical University of Applied Science in Rosenheim in south of Bavaria. And well, I'm still working in AMNOG as a member of the arbitration board. So I'm really close to the process and also the topic for today.
Absolutely. So I think that gives already, let's say, some expectations, Thomas, as I think some of the key parts around AMNOG have maybe also changed. Not that new, actually, but I think still in the way that we can at least speak now about the first experiences. Mm-hmm. I think the key for a lot of people is basically the process has a bit changed from maybe I would call it negotiation-based pricing towards more kind of pricing guardrails, which are more linked to the benefits, the clinical benefits of a product. What do you think about that? I mean, to what extent does that change maybe also and especially reflect a fair balance now between rewarding innovation and maybe ensuring, maybe call it economic efficiency?
The major change was in 2023 when the GKV Finanzstabilisierungsgesetz, so that was the Statutory Health Insurance Financial Stabilization Act, if you try to translate it, that changed this kind of guardrails. From the beginning of the AMNOG, it was very clear and easy to understand, even to my students. They loved it, that it's totally easy. You show an additional benefit versus the appropriate comparator therapy, and then you can achieve a higher price. So that's economically reasonable, that's easy to understand, but this also gives a great task to the two parties, the head association of sickness funds and the manufacturer, who have to negotiate a price which really reflects this level of additional benefit. I think over the 12 years this rule was in place, both parties really managed to find adequate prices which reflect this level of additional benefit. And the system was also very clear. If you do not show additional benefit, you don't get a higher price. So completely reasonable from an economic point of view, and I think it worked. 2023, this changed. It's now much more complicated. There are some more guardrails. The first point is we have to consider whether the appropriate comparator therapy is a generic drug, a low-priced drug, or whether it is a high-priced patent-protected drug. So if it's a generic drug, nothing has changed. Additional benefit, no matter what size of additional benefit, you can achieve a higher price. For patent-protected drugs, you have to achieve at least a considerable benefit, so considerable or major, to get a price which is higher than the appropriate comparator therapies price. If you have only a minor additional benefit, so a small incremental benefit, a step innovation, you don't get a higher price than the appropriate comparator, so you're limited. And if the benefit is unquantifiable, then you also cannot get a higher price than the appropriate comparator therapy. And non-quantifiable is not meaning, well, it's smaller than minor and you can't even see it. No, it does mean the data do not state whether it's a major or minor or considerable additional benefit. And if you are not able to show any additional benefit, you even have to give a 10% discount to the price of the appropriate comparator therapy. So a little bit more complicated. And what was the objective? What is behind this new regulation? The objective is that the politicians have seen, and I think the sickness funds have seen, well, we have a lot of drugs with a minor benefit and the prices increase over time, and they want to do some cost containment and provide an incentive to invest in breakthrough therapies, in high quality trial data, into huge benefits. On the other hand, they made cost containment to say, well, you have additional benefit, but you don't get a higher price. And I think this contradicts a little bit economic efficiency in this case.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the other part, and I think that's also what you mentioned. I mean, the price now a bit more heavily depend on the added benefit by the GBA. And I mean, what you and I know, of course, is roughly half of the members of the GBA are also members of the GKVs, right? So of the health insurance funds, meaning, I could maybe as well argue that the current, or maybe the new kind of system, rather said, might also create more kind of incentives for the GBA to maybe think at least a bit more carefully about the added benefit, where I'm not exactly sure, because you explained already that say politicians have rather seen more minor, more non-quantifiable added benefit with maybe a bit of a link of increasing prices, always a bit of a question, right? Because they're not increasing, right? I mean, we just have different price for different products. So I think that's an important consideration. But what have you seen there anything that maybe there was a change in GBA or anything where we can maybe touch base on that since the last roughly 1.5 years since the new law was in effect?
Yeah, we've done an analysis on this, and the starting point was, well, there is a change, and now the question, do we get a higher price? Higher price level is dependent on the question, is this considerable or just minor? And when you look into the regulations, the Arzneimittelnutzenverordnung, you see that it's rather vaguely defined what is a minor, what is a considerable benefit. For example, a considerable benefit is a noticeable relief of the disease, while a minor benefit is a reduction of non-severe symptoms. Well, that's something a legal person can write, but what does it really mean? So what is the difference if you reduce non-severe symptoms? That can be a noticeable relief. So there's a kind of wiggling room to assess here. The same is true on the side effect side. Considerable benefit is a meaningful reduction. A minor benefit is a relevant reduction. So here again, room for interpretation on reductions of side effects. And we have drugs which have positive effects, for example, a considerable increase in overall survival, but also have more side effects. So then the GBA has to judge the positive and the negative impacts. And there is a room to interpret data as considerable or as minor additional benefit. So there might be an incentive to be a little bit more rough. And what we've done, Thomas Nitzel, our student, and my colleague Sebastian Robert and I, we performed an analysis to see whether the GBA really changed their assessment behavior. So that is preliminary. We are not completely through, but I can report a few points. First of all, we looked for a comparator group, and we looked into the France assessment of the HAS to say, well, let's match German assessments before and after the change in the guardrails and match it with the French ones. And of course, we know they are not perfectly matching, but for 85%, there's a good match to say, well, a considerable benefit in one country is also considerable benefit in the other country. we then performed difference in difference analysis, so some kind of regression analysis. And what we've seen that before the change of the guardrails, the proportion of considerable benefit assessment was very similar by 21% or something like that. And this does not change very much in France, where it increased to 23%, but in Germany, it went down to 14%.
Wow.
So that is a clear drop, and the regression analysis showed that is statistically significant. So there appears to be a change in the assessment. We are currently undergoing some analysis to look into the details. So what is the reason? Probably do some qualitative analysis. But it's a kind of matter of fact that we see here a change in the behavior of the GBA. So that could be a disincentive which was probably not intended, or probably intended, we never know, by the healthcare politicians, by our Ministry of Health.
Yeah, I mean, who is no more the Minister of Health, right? Just by the way, as we just recorded in May 2025. But still, I mean, this is a significant change. I mean, as you said, and this is just, I think, when you had a look on the considerable added benefit. I guess with the minor ones, there might be maybe similar ones, or is that maybe another kind of?
It appears to be similar. But we are not finalized with the analysis, unfortunately, today. But also for the minor added benefit, it seems that that is a more strict assessment by the GBA following the guidelines. We will look into patent protected and generic drugs as appropriate comparator therapies, but today I have only the first impressions of the last few years.
Wow, but that's anyway already very very interesting to see. I mean, it would basically confirm a bit what I guess also experts said already around 2 years ago when the law was already discussed and also later on implemented, that such an incentive is maybe a bit more biased towards one side, which is more the kind of maybe call it payer side, right? And is basically as well giving the pharma industry maybe a bit of a more difficult time. Generally, because I mean, you're also part of the, let's say, arbitration board. And if we maybe just take a step back, right, just maybe have a look from the external perspective. I mean, GBA is one thing, but ultimately, I think the goal was also to maybe get the prices a bit more into a direction which is maybe seen, at least from external, a bit more fair, right? Which means before, at least also what you said, the benefit was not always directly linked, even though, and I agree with you, that I think the negotiation-based approach was basically working, right? If maybe also the insurance side would not agree with it, I mean, they would have either not accepted the contract and or, as also sometimes done, right? They might maybe as well have terminated some of those contracts early on and then went into a renegotiation. And I mean, what you also said, if there was no added benefit before, there was also no possibility basically to have a higher price in comparison to the comparator therapy. So do you see, or maybe you have not analyzed it, but then it's more kind of a feeling, would the prices also have changed in the last 1.5 years, or is it rather still more the kind of added benefit level of what we see, but the prices are still around a similar kind of trend? I know it's a bit more difficult because price levels might be as well set at different levels, of course, so it's a bit easier with the added benefit. But have you any kind of data analysis or opinion on that?
Well, I think it's very tough to answer this question because you cannot really compare the drugs before and after the regulation regarding their price levels. So we have drugs now like pembrolizumab, who has assessments before and after, so under the old and under the new guardrails. So, and then we have a blended price across the 30 or something indications. And of course, the indications and the therapy areas change a little bit over time, so it's hard to really compare here the price levels. Therefore, we focused on the benefit assessment because there everything was under the same regulation, but there was this probable incentive for the GBA to be tougher on that.
Yeah, got you. So, I mean, if to make it not even, let's say, easier now, right? I think there was another, let's say, regulation added, which is maybe call it the Medical Research Act, right? Which Some basically said that this was rather to strengthen Germany as a research location. I mean, if it was also linked a bit to, I think, the pricing part, and we will just speak about that in a couple of seconds. But I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, I think the more regulation we might get in there, and the more interrelations between those regulations, this might potentially also add further inefficiencies into the system, I guess. But maybe start with the first part. What do you think about, let's say, combining the research incentives for Germany basically as a location versus the price setting at a later stage? I mean, what is your opinion on that?
Well, I think it's a reasonable objective to say, well, we want to improve clinical research in Germany and take the country as one of the leading countries in clinical research and to provide incentives. I don't think that this incentive should be based on the price because this distorts economic efficiency. You can do a lot, and a lot was done in the Medical Research Act. You can reduce bureaucracy. You can optimize processes of ethical committees, of the regulatory authorities when doing clinical research. You could, there's parts of standardization of contracts, so that makes it easier. So there's a lot you can do, and if you want to subsidize the companies to do research in Germany, you can also think about tax reductions or something like that. That is done across the world. What was also done, and that's a little bit difficult from an economic point of view, is we have a reduction or we have a different regulation in the prices if you do research in Germany. And that's also a little bit complicated because we have two different ways to show that. But I don't think that really a price advantage is really something which brings the companies to do more research in Germany. Also, those regulations are somewhat complicated. So if one relates to the guardrails, and there's the regulation that if you include 5% of your patients in your clinical trials in Germany, then the new guardrails do not apply. So you're in the same situation as before, or as you have a generic appropriate comparator therapy. And here we can make can think about an example where this clearly states that there are some inefficiencies. Let's assume you have two companies, a US-based company, a Germany-based company, and both do a clinical trial in a similar area, and both have very similar results. And the US-based company makes a worldwide trial with something like 4% of patients in Germany, while the German company also makes a worldwide trial, but let's say 6%. And both are compared versus a patent protected drug. So then different guardrails apply if you have only a minor benefit. So the company with 6% of patients in Germany can have a higher price than the appropriate comparator, while the other, only with 4%, cannot have a higher price. So both have similar drugs. That's a little bit, that's an easy point of view, but if they are similar and do have different price, it is a distortion of economic efficiency. And that's the main point. I think we should not provide incentives by the price to help the companies investing in clinical research in Germany. We also should think that it is probably something like the protectionism. We heard a lot about protectionism and tariffs and so on. So I think this is something which supports German and European companies more than companies from abroad, from Japan, the US, or somewhere else in the world.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, I agree. And I think on top, I think you said that before, let's say you alluded a bit more on the topic. I think if you maybe take tax incentives, you might really, let's say, try to take benefit of the research, right? I mean, if you just lay it down to the number of a trial population, I mean, take an oncology trial with 300 patients, we're speaking about roughly 15 patients in Germany.
Yeah.
What is that? 2 centers, 5 centers, whatever. It's very few centers.
It's very
not,
few.
It is research, of course, because it's part of a bigger research, but it's not incentivizing really bigger investment in research overall, which is just another kind of idea as well, beyond the whole kind of pricing idea. And I think your example is as well very good. I mean, it shows basically, I mean, if you have, let's say, a company maybe taking, for example, 12 patients, another taking 16 patients in Germany, I mean, 6 patients more, four to 6 patients more, and you might end up in a totally different kind of pricing situation.
Yeah.
Which doesn't make a lot of sense overall.
No. It really does not. So I think this regulation is really not leading the way into the right directions. Well, there's first another point. So if you have a clinical research department in Germany and you can show, well, we have this and we do research here, not based on the number of patients, then you can negotiate confidential rebates, which you cannot do in Germany if you do not do clinical research and have the departments here. So that could be an incentive to say, well, if companies like the confidential prices, which come with a 9% additional discount, then it's fine. But I don't think that worked very well in the last few years. I think not many confidential prices have been negotiated, and this regulation will end in 2026, or there will be an evaluation whether that works or not. I think that will get away, and we will have different regulations. But there's also probably not really fair behavior or fair point of view between different companies. So I'm not quite convinced.
I mean, it's an interesting one. Maybe first to quickly come back to the kind of research linked to the confidential rebates, what you said. One could, of course, as well argue, given the latest executive order by Trump and his administration around the, maybe call it external reference pricing, also from the US into other countries, maybe that could be more relevant in the next couple of years, right? Because ultimately, I think also what research shows is, especially international reference pricing is rather leading to higher price, right? Because I think countries which are used as reference might rather get a higher list price at least. So ultimately, you could, of course, as well think, and that's maybe call it as well a bit more beneficial to the system as well, if there might be then at least some more confidential kind of rebates as well suddenly available, because you might end up in getting to a better, let's say, also position from a system perspective, if companies do not only have Germany as the biggest country in Europe in their mind, but also the link to the US.
Yeah, absolutely. That could be helpful, but you never know what really will come from this idea by the US American president. We'll see. I think that's a matter of negotiation in the end. If we see that he wants to lower prices by 2/3 or something like that, that would really be a big problem for the pharmaceutical company, which makes more than half of their profits in the US, and a price reduction of 50-60% will really reduce all the profits. So I think there will be a lot of discussion, and let's see how that will really be implemented, this external reference pricing.
Yeah, fully agree. I think the other question was basically, which really raised, let's say, while you were speaking, was, of course, when you think about the other incentive for companies, moving again back to that kind of 5% study population again. I mean, if I would really see that as a benefit, or at least not as a harm for me as a company, right, running a trial, I mean, I would clearly try to have those 5% of German populations in my study design implemented, right? So the question is basically also if the kind of benefit, if you want to call it like that, with the new guardrails, because you might still have a lot of trials nowadays with maybe less than 5% of German patients in the trials, might be diminished maybe in the next 2 or 3 years, right? When all of the kind of currently being started trials are implementing that kind of rule, then we're basically back to what we had 2 years ago.
Yeah, that would happen, but I would expect that the companies really look into that. So where can we do the studies at best? Germany is not the country where clinical research is the easiest way. If you look in computer tomography, you need additional okays from authorities and so on. So it's not that easy. And if you have a generic comparator drug, you don't even have to do it. So I think the companies will really look, will this really help us, and then put some more research efforts in Germany, but I think not across everything. So probably the incentive is not well thought in the end.
Yeah.
I think it's more important to reduce bureaucracy, to make it easier to implement clinical research in Germany. That would help the research system here in Germany much more than the price incentive, which can, well, distort efficiency and economic thinking.
Yeah, fully agree. Fully agree. Okay, let's move a bit into the, let's say, future as well. I mean, when we have a look at, let's say, interactions between GBA assessment, price negotiation with the GKVSV, growing legal framework, currently we don't see, let's say, a further minimization of bureaucracy, etc. I mean, from your perspective, would be the most effective levers to restore maybe rationality and efficiency in the system, maybe even stepwise, or maybe the first step where you think that would make most sense? You mentioned already, but like tax incentives, etc. But what would be your key thing to maybe include in the system?
Well, first of all, we have a new coalition in Germany, which is now between the conservatives and the social democrats, and they said, well, we want to take a closer look into these guardrails. We want to have a look at personalized medicine, which is difficult to reimburse because it's a one-time treatment, which a lot of cost and so on. So they have seen that further development is possible. I think there are two potential ways of thinking, and what I see is that a few sickness funds argue that we should go to a more cost-based pricing, like Japan is doing. Japan has implemented cost-based pricing for some products, and that is a real challenge. It's very difficult, and a lot of questions are unanswered. For example, how much of the research effort done worldwide to develop a new drug or to develop failed projects in the research, how much of this cost should Germany bear? And how do we calculate this cost to individual patients? So, which is very unclear and uncertain. What is the number of patients which are treated over the life cycle? Even you do not know the number of indications you get. So I think for pembrolizumab, for example, which is really a product which has shown that new indications can come to a drug, you would probably not have accepted at Merck that you have 30 and more indications in the end, and to achieve to reach this number of patients. So there are a lot of things which are unanswered in this way. And even Japan says, well, we have difficulty in implementing this cost-based pricing. So I think that's probably not the right way to target. Another way, as an economist, and we both are economists, is of course cost-benefit analysis to run models, which is now part of the European HTA assessment, which has not been undertaken in Germany, but I guess there's a lot of potential to say, well, we have at least cost per quality number to say, well, is it a reasonable price or not? We probably will not have to follow the English NICE assessment, which £30,000 per quality as a kind of threshold. There can be a lot done, but I think it could help the negotiating parties to find easier the way to have an adequate price. What we see in the arbitration board is, and sometimes that we see equivalent lines of argumentation leading to completely different price expectations from the both parties, and that's completely fine. And I think if you run a good health economic model, a good budget impact analysis to show really all the expected impacts on inpatient, outpatient care, and so on, I think it would be much easier to find a good negotiation result in the negotiations. And I think that could be or should be the way to move forward in the German system, to not only look at clinical benefit, but also on the economic consequences of innovations.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Absolutely. So let's just see what will happen. I mean, as you said, we have a new government. Nobody knows what will happen maybe in the future. Of course, a lot also depends on the future budget situation, the future economic growth, if there's any in the near term. I think that's a lot of question marks. But I think generally, I think agree with your conclusions. I want to thank you. That was a lot of great insights. I think listeners will benefit a lot from that, also from your latest research insights. Fun as always. Thanks a lot, Thomas.
It was a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me. And probably we'll see you next time in a few years on different topics, because AMNOG will move forward. It will be developed further. So I think there will be a lot of discussions in the future.
Thank you. Great insights, especially also from Thomas Hammerschmidt, who has had a lot of experience from the pharma side, but is now also coming from the research perspective, and on top, of course, as well, from his membership at the arbitration board for drugs in Germany. I think interesting is especially when we discuss about the latest changes in the legal framework, especially around the pricing. Important considerations here are, of course, that you need now generally to have a positive added benefit, so more than a non-quantifiable added benefit, in order then to also negotiate a higher price premium versus the comparator therapy. I think before it was rather negotiation-based pricing. However, one could argue that there's also a bit of like a loophole in there. If you, for example, have 5% or at least 5% of your trial population in Germany, you are basically back to the negotiation-based pricing, which is, of course, especially also helping when you maybe have the fear of getting no added benefit at all. Having said that, the latest research as well by Thomas and his colleagues have as well shown that, especially in the considerable added benefit level, that has been lowered since the introduction of the latest law by statistically significant 7%. So it was going down from before 21 to 14%. And especially interesting thing was that in France, as a kind of comparator, in a way, similar kind of system, similar kind of, let's say, countryside, it has been stable in the same time period. So one could argue that also the incentives for the GBA in this case has been strengthened towards a lower added benefit, especially if, of course, companies have not included at least 5% of the trial population in Germany. The other component is, of course, the confidential rebates within Germany if you have a research department in Germany, which is then possible, but that is not yet seen as often as maybe expected as well by politicians. However, we also quickly discussed that this could maybe be more strengthened, especially around the confidential rebates, if and in case a new kind of international reference pricing in the US would become reality. That was an episode of MAP, the Market Access podcast provided by Mars Market Access and Pricing Strategy, which is your healthcare consultancy in the German-speaking markets. MAP is available every second week with a new episode, so watch out. And in case you might have questions, contact me directly and or visit our website on www.marketaccess-pricingstrategy.de.